It's my favorite day today. So welcome everybody. This is what we're working on today. If you're new, this show is all about people getting together to draw and just improve our skills, kind of taking a break from the rest of the week, just focus on developing our drawing skills so then we can apply it however we'd like. So you'll find a link in the description below as well as at the top of the chat here where you can share your work when you're done. Feel free to draw along with us. A lot of you would just like to watch as we do this and then go back later and draw with it. So we're episode 88 or 89, somewhere around there. So there's a lot of these that we've done, and it's awesome to see so many familiar names. If you are new though, I'd love to see where you're viewing from. You're going to find the link to the reference image in the description below, so bring that up. It's best to have that kind of side by side if you can. So if you have the ability to put your drawing paper right next to the reference image, that can work out. And I love to hear from everybody as this is happening. So if you're taking an entirely different approach, or if you see something that's off in this drawing, if you're struggling with something, throw it all into the chat and we'll do our best to help you through it. So let's get to it. Today's drawing is really about control. So the last few episodes have been about really been driven by my desire to just push charcoal around and push the materials around. This flips that, and it's about really kind of bringing ourselves into focus, to focus on the control. And the key thing here for this drawing is paying attention to the edges. So this is a very light-filled scene. Of course, we have this reflective and kind of smooth object here with this picture. So it's all about really paying close attention to the subtle changes along the edges. So as you follow along this edge, for example, you can see that it's constantly changing. And that's what really creates that sense of form with this. So we'll work on getting the proportions right, we'll work on getting the values right, but most critically it's going to be about what's happening along those edges. Oh, you can see here, for example, there's a lost edge where that edge of the handle just disappears into that white background, but it becomes more visible and sharper in this area. So it's that contrast that we're going to be really focusing on today. I say that's what I'm going to be focusing on, but you may take an entirely different path through this drawing, and that's what makes this show exciting. So welcome everybody. Materials today, just a smooth sheet of white drawing paper. This is an 8x10, a little bit smaller than I've done in many of the past episodes. But often this is between an 8x10 and a 9x12. I'm going to keep it really simple. I'm just going to use this ebony pencil. That's it. I'm not going to work with anything else. This is going to give me the full range of values that I need. For erasers, I've got this rubber eraser. This is a retractable one made by Derwent that I then use a razor blade to kind of sharpen to this fine point. And then, of course, a nice kneaded eraser and a blending stump. So yeah, let's get to it. So welcome everybody. See a lot of familiar names. Heather, I see you joining us. Welcome. I'm glad you could make it. Some of you, can kind of come in and out, but it's awesome to see. We've been doing this for just over a year now, and many of you have been with us the entire time. So, all right, where do I want to begin? So, as really every drawing begins with a gesture. And my philosophy for drawing is that really the drawing is just about continually refining that gesture. And so you're always kind of in control about how far you push that. So today, I really want that experience of creating something that's highly detailed and rendered. I want those nice crisp edges and control over those edges, but that may not be what you want today. But regardless, my philosophy for drawing is that it all originates from the gesture, and then we bring it up to whatever resolution you feel like going for that day. So using the side of the pencil, I'm just going to start laying down marks, and this is all going to be very light. And I've been playing with the exposure settings on the camera and on the on OBS here to hopefully help address some of the issues and the challenges with graphite, and that it's so light and it's so blown out. Let me see if I can drop this down there so we can see it. I'm gonna have to adjust those a little bit later so that you know, as the values can really come together, it's going to change how the camera perceives these things. So I'll have to make some adjustments as we go through. But hopefully in these early stages, again, I just made those comments about how critical the gesture is, and then we're not able to see any of it. That doesn't really work. So so what I have instead for my setup, for those of you who have been with me for a while, you've heard all this. But if you're new, my setup is on the screen in front of me, I see what you're seeing. I see the overhead capture of the drawing, and then I have the reference image right next to it. And so I'm actually going to be utilizing that to draw from. So rather than look at the paper too much, I'm going to be actually looking at what's happening on the camera there to help, because it's the vertical projection. Looking at it at this angle, my brain is already calibrating to the perspective, and it's going to distort things a little bit. One of the other challenges that was really key that I had to address in that preparatory drawing was the perspective of this vase, of this mostly symmetrical object. How do we create a form that feels like it's got the correct proportion, the correct symmetry, and that it holds together properly? Let's see, I may shift things over a little bit. So in this initial gesture, I'm doing both kind of a positive and negative, kind of additive and subtractive kind of approach to laying this in. So you can see that I'm working on the negative space here as well as the positive. And in that, trying to establish these objects as shapes and values early on. You know, I'm doing some kind of line work to some degree, but not a lot. It's going to be mostly about values, and we want to get rid of the lines. Lines are abstractions, so if your objective is realism, then you ultimately want to get rid of the lines in your drawing. At the same time, the lines can be very expressive, and we interpret lines very naturally as humans. And so it's not, I would hate for somebody to think that I'm saying something along the lines that lines are bad. It's just a matter of being in control of them. What happens is that when we learn to draw, it's our natural instinct to use a line to represent the edge of an object. And so that becomes the stronger instinct that we have to override when our objective is for realism. But like I said at the top of the show here, this isn't necessarily about drawing exactly the way I draw. This is just an opportunity for us to draw, because it's so easy for us to neglect that part of our artistic practice. So my main focus at this point is it's twofold. So it's the primary objective at this stage is for me to take an initial pass over the object. So I'm trying to, in my mind, predict what's going to give me the greatest challenge, and start to work through that. So as I'm drawing and as I'm talking to you all, there's part of me, part of my brain that is engaged with thinking ahead and how to figure out how to solve these problems here, like the edges, like the value control, like the symmetry of the object, things like that. So that's the primary objective at this stage. And then secondarily, I'm looking at the overall composition. I want to make sure that everything fits on the page properly. And one of the things that I find really helpful when working with an object like this is to try to work both sides of the object at the same time. And we'll keep going through that. I'm going to keep adjusting as we go. But right now, if I'm evaluating the placement of the object, it feels like everything is going to fit. We got this cool leafy green thing kind of curling up out of there. I want to make sure that that fits on there. You can see this hand is just kind of resting on the page, and I'm not worried about it smudging. I want it to actually. I want it to start to build up that haze. That's what's going to help me to control the edges, is start to kind of build up the drawing, and then you wipe it down and unify everything. Then you build it up again, and you sharpen those edges, and you wipe it down again, and you keep building it up and knocking it down and trying to find that balance between variety and unity in the drawing. So that, you know, as we define edges and we sharpen things, that creates divisions on the page, and as we wipe it down, it unifies it, and we're constantly balancing those two until we find the correct balance for our needs. And I'm trying to, at this stage, as I look at the vase here, or the pitcher, I want to break that curve down into a sequence of short straight marks. I want to try to find the angle at each step along that curve, rather than try to create a perfect S-curve that's going to capture that on either side. And if I break it into short straight lines, it's going to help me to achieve a proper symmetry, and it's going to actually give me more precise and a more accurate curve. And so if you need help with that, then you can use what's called angle sighting. And for those of you that have been with this show for a long time, you've heard this tool before. Angle sighting is a really helpful tool. And all I'm doing when I'm doing this is I'm closing one eye, and that flattens my depth perception. And I'm aligning the pencil here. The angle of the pencil aligns with the angle of the object that I'm targeting. All right, so if I'm looking at this section of the picture, I'm aligning that, I'm placing it directly on top of the reference image, and I'm going to carry it and place it directly on top of the drawing. Now in this case, the screen shows that overhead projection, so in your case, you would want to put that directly on top of your own drawing. And in that way, you can compare the reference image to the drawing. And at this stage, as I'm looking at those angles, I'm trying to visualize this vertical axis that runs right through the center, and then compare that. I need to visualize what a reflected angle would be. It's starting by using the straightforward angle sighting. So I'm just copying this angle, and then evaluating, does it feel symmetrical from there. Yeah, we haven't really worked with too many objects that are like this in this series. And so hopefully this is a new challenge that's going to give you some kind of new tools to address. One big thing, I see a question from Brent. If you do have any questions, just as Brent did, type it in all caps. It helps me to identify it. So let me just check on your question. Yeah, Brent, yeah, for this, your question is about using the ebony pencil today. I'm just going to use that. But if you have a full set of graphite pencils, then you might choose to be using some of the harder ones at this stage, gradually moving into the softer ones later on. I'm just going for the ebony right here for the entire drawing. It's equivalent to, between a 6B and a 9B graphite. It's really soft and dark. So, Luca, this is live. You were watching me draw live from the beautiful state of Colorado. I see many of you viewing from here in Colorado. We are finally free of snow. We've had some beautiful summer weather here, so. Okay, so the handle that I'm trying to evaluate here, you can see I started to try to kind of tackle that curve, but I feel like I jumped the gun a little bit. So I'm going to try to visualize the angles if I were to break that apart. All right. And I can see that it's really dark on the screen, so I'm going to adjust the exposures again. So lightening that up a little bit, that's a little bit more accurate now, so it's not quite as gray as it was before. But those early marks are very light and difficult to view. All right, so I just wiped that down with a just a paper towel to kind of smooth things out. And I'm going to ignore this leaf thing for now, this bough that's kind of coming out of there. I just want to make sure that I've placed this thing properly, the picture properly, so that I have room for it. And now I'm going to really build the vase and then bring that in later. So I think what I need to do now, though, is really establish the primary value relationships here. So utilizing the side of the pencil allows me to cover a broad area very quickly. And so I like this overhand grip, and I'll be using that for most of the drawing. You can see that you can really build up an area very quickly. The key to it, though, is to gradually roll your pencil as you're doing it. So as I'm filling that broad area, I'm letting it roll in my fingers here so I don't develop these flat spots that'll ultimately be trouble later. I can see a little spittle there on the page. I'll have to get rid of that somehow later. And then at this stage too, I want to start to think about the direction of the marks and how that's going to help me later on. And it may feel a little premature right now to be thinking about those things since it's such a loose drawing at this stage, but I feel like when I incorporate that earlier on in the drawing, it can ultimately be more effective. So what I'm talking about here is that I'm trying to pay attention to the direction of the marks as related to the form of the objects. So in this case, if I'm looking at this curve here, if I run the marks in the background parallel to that curve, I'm going to perceive those two aspects, those two areas of the subject as belonging together when they're actually quite different. So I'm drawing the fabric back here and the picture is here. And by changing the direction of the marks, that's the visual cue to your brain that says those are two different things. And if I run them all parallel, it's going to conflict with that. It's going to say that actually they belong together, and it's going to actually flatten things out. It's going to bring that background forward. And you're going to be fighting your own visual system when you do that. So I like to start to think through some of that a bit. So I've got like this line here, for example, that really almost perpendicularly intersects with that edge of the vase there. And then if I'm bringing in marks here, I might as well start to think about some of the cross contour information. So that cross contour information these are the marks that are inside the form that help to define its three-dimensional structure. So thinking about marks that wrap around the form of that picture. And if you let your eyes lose focus, if you squint and let your eyes get blurry, you can see where the edges disappear. It helps to eliminate some of the detail, and it prioritizes subtle value relationships. And that's going to be really helpful too. You can see at this stage, I want those edges to be really soft, and I'm going to gradually sharpen them as we go through. And if you're not sure what direction to make your marks, then you might just default to a circular mark, something like this, something that's more omnidirectional. And it's one of the advantages to using the overhand grip like this is that it creates a more broad stroke that blends together more effectively, and it kind of eliminates some of those directional marks. And I say that, and you can see there's some stronger marks here. And we'll kind of work through some strategies for smoothing things out. So if you're having trouble blending things and creating a nice transition in values, then I'll give you, like I said, I'll give you some strategies that I use to help to smooth things out so it doesn't get all blotchy. Because what can happen, especially with this technique of wiping it down with a paper towel, if there are any flaws in the paper, or if you had kind of oily fingers that left a fingerprint on the paper, you might end up getting kind of a blotchy surface. And you can see, like, I've got, because I'm talking, I got some of these spittle marks here that I'll have to deal with later. So we'll see how we can clean those up, or if we need to. All right, so I'm seeing this form here, just double checking the angle sighting. And then as I get up here, I'm going to intentionally angle the marks a little bit to run contrary to the slope of that picture. And hopefully I can get this done in 2 hours. That's generally my target for the series, is to try to finish a drawing in 2 hours. You know, this one feels like it's more detailed and might require more time, but my hope is that if I develop the process properly, that it actually won't take any more time. Sometimes what can happen is, you know, when we create that intention of detail and fine control, it slows everything down. And so I'm trying to maintain that quick, loose pace that that we used in previous episodes, in previous drawings. And then kind of, if I'm strategic, then the marks that I make will all suggest detail more than anything. Okay. Brent, yeah, that's a good comment. I think your comment here is, I think this reference photo would have been more easily translated if in grayscale. So that is a wonderful comment, and it's a question that I got a lot early on in the series, but I'm intentionally choosing colored images to work from. It's my opinion that the best way to boost your skills in drawing is to work from life. But that's not always possible. In this case, you know, of course, we're working from photographs here. It's really difficult for me to work from life in this situation. And so I think working from photographs, it can be great as well. And I think the next best opportunity for us is to work from a colored photograph. So it challenges us to interpret those colors as values. Because the intention here for me is I'm developing my drawing skills because I ultimately want to apply them to my painting practice. Especially if I'm working from life, I'm going to need to use that skill of translating those colors into values. And so this is an intentional challenge because I want to build those specific skills. Now, what you're saying though is perfectly logical, in that if your objective is to create a really kind of solid, accurate reproduction of this photograph in graphite, then the shortest way to get there would be to convert this to grayscale, or that would certainly shorten the process there. And so there's nothing, there's no kind of, I mean, there's nothing to say you can't work from a black and white photograph, but I just want to kind of explain why I'm intentionally using a colored photograph, in that it becomes an exercise to develop a skill that I know will need to apply in other areas of my artistic practice. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because it is something that you know, we get that question a lot early on, and it's been a while since I've had to address that. So, but again, this is my philosophy in this drawing show, is that this is just an opportunity for us to advance our drawing practices, and you guys are in control of how you want to do that. So there you have it. You know, I think if you know, one of the questions that we used to get a lot is, you know, is tracing cheating or creating a grid? None of it's cheating, right? It's all up there, and it's all good depending on what your objective, you know, what your specific objective is for that drawing. That's a little off right there. So this is a situation where viewing the drawing vertically, so when I'm looking at the screen in front of me, it helped me to correct this angle here, because when my first angle that I placed from this perspective looked correct, but when I see it vertically, I realize that it's off. And so if you haven't already, take some time to step back and look at your drawing vertically to see if there are any initial adjustments you can make to the perspective. So yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to hear more comments about that. You know, that interpreting value is really one of the challenges in drawing. I always get really tripped up with highly saturated colors, interpreting those values. Like you're saying, Brent, the image itself is virtually desaturated. It's virtually grayscale. So it's really close already. And sometimes too, the program that you're using to desaturate the image may be making some decisions for you, right? And it may not necessarily be 100% accurate. I don't really know, what those programs do, how they look at it. But I do find it really helpful when I'm painting sometimes. If I'm working from a reference image, I'll have the colored version, I'll have a black and white version, I'll have one that's all blurred down, I'll have multiple versions of that reference so that I can see it in different ways. And the more I can approach the subject from a variety of angles, the better, and that we can kind of do that visually here. So right now, when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at it through blurred vision. So my eyes are all out of focus. And that helps me to see one interpretation of the values. And you can play around with that too. So let your eyes lose focus and study the value relationships, bring them into sharp focus and see how that shifts your interpretation of the values. Squint your eyes versus blurring your eyes but opening them wide. The more variety you can incorporate into how you observe the subject, the better, in my opinion. So, all right, so we're just gradually building up tone here. What do I want to do? I want to, the form of the vase is starting to come together, and I haven't really started to look at the edges, but I have some basic structure. So if I'm looking at the positive and negative space here, looking at that alternating sequence of dark to light, to dark to light, and that's largely what I'm seeing in the reference. So I'm feeling good about that. Down in here, we have a real lost edge. It gets, and I don't want to invent the edge here at this point. But having said that, I do want to make sure that it doesn't read as asymmetrical. So what I'm doing now is I'm giving these light indications on the widest portions of this curve, and I want to make sure that those are horizontal. And then when we look at the base of the vase, there's a very specific curve to it. And I can see where it starts to emerge. So I'm going to visualize a plumb line here, a vertical line that runs up through the vase, and I'm going to compare that to the reference. And what I'm seeing is that there's this curve in the neck here, and that's directly above the point at which the base of the picture becomes more visible. And I think I'm alternating between calling this a vase and a picture. So this is a picture, but so I apologize if I'm being confusing here. All right, now let me see. It seems about right. And then when I look at it over on this side, that base there seems to, if I draw a plumb line up through it, it's a bit offset. It's a bit off to the right of this curve here. So I'm going to have to trust that. It feels weird. I feel like that should be drawn symmetrically, but it's not. Now, I want to visualize a horizontal axis connecting these points here. And I find it helpful sometimes to start with a larger area. So in this case, you can see on the lower portion of the vase here that there's a soft transition. There's not a really sharp defined line. So I want to start with that. And what that does is it opens things up for me to correct that edge. If I start with a sharp, precise line along here, it kind of locks me into that a little bit more. And so if I'm off, then I could be in trouble later on in trying to correct it. So, but this gives me a chance to kind of come back and double check my thinking, observe the drawing, just make sure that I'm getting this curve correct. So I'm giving myself kind of a wide berth, as it were, for this this angle, and I can adjust it slightly until it all comes into view. Maier said, like, in other words, if you use a grayscale reference, your drawing will be a drawing of a grayscale reference. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's all good. I think, like I said, sometimes I actually work specifically with grayscale references because it helps me to challenge my interpretation of value as it relates to those colors. So it's, I mean, I think it should all be part of the artistic practice. And so you may have some drawings where you're working from colored photographs, some drawings where you're working from a grayscale, some maybe where you're just blowing out the color and really making it high key, or simplifying the values. I mean, I think all of those approaches, they just help you to develop tools for your toolkit so that you can access your control over those values and hues more effectively, more quickly. It just speeds that process up. All right. And so now I'm kind of shifting to this, the handle here. And what I'm observing is that there's a dark kind of core, a shadow core along the handle. And I'm observing that path from it being kind of fairly sharp up here, and then it kind of transfers out to the outer edge. And again, I'm keeping those edges fairly soft because I'm not 100% confident in the placement of them. And I can refine those, I can refine that edge later. And I think it used to be more of a practice of mine to start with a sharp edge drawing and then fill it in. And now I'm reversing that, starting with a soft edge drawing and then gradually sharpening it. And it helps to create a sense of atmosphere and helps to unify the drawing. So there's a lot going on up here that's really critical to creating the perspective of that opening. And so I'm kind of making a mental note right now. I'm going to come back in and really work this later. You can see this. You can see this is really nice, light, sharp edge here, and then it translates it down into here. It just disappears along that edge of the vase. And so that's the kind of stuff that we can really sink our teeth into later on in the drawing. This is what I was talking about in terms of those edges. One of the things I'm observing, it's easier to see with blurred vision, is that there's a bit of a shadow core right in along here on this section of the vase. So not up against that edge, just set inward a little bit. So if we think about the form shadow, this is the shadow of the object. It's not the cast shadow, it's the form shadow. There is a shadow core, the darkest part of that. And so I'm trying to observe that path right now. And I'm just trying to ignore any sort of kind of reflection and detail in that. I want to get that form right, and then we're gonna render those reflections in there later on, once we've really established that form. One of the things that I find really helpful too, in addition to using blurred vision to study your object, is indirect observation. So if I'm looking at this section on the reference photo, I'm putting my awareness on this. I'm thinking about something else, even though I'm looking at that one specific area. And in that way, it helps to observe the relationships between things. And that's really the critical aspect here, is our relationships. So, all right. There's a question here about whether or not I'll use the eraser to get the highlight. Yeah, you can see as I wipe this down, I'm building up a haze of graphite across here. And so that's allowing me an opportunity to erase out a highlight. I don't know if that's showing up, but you can see that you can see that there's a haze of graphite, and so there will be an opportunity to kind of do some negative drawing there, subtractive drawing, and I'll be able to pull out that highlight. And that, again, that's, as you're suggesting, it gives me a little bit of control over that highlight. With such a light drawing, one of the things that you might do is take it some time to observe where the lightest lights are. So even if you look at this fabric back here, for example, there's kind of a hot spot down in here, there's a hot spot up here, and the transition in between, there's just a slight shift in value. And I think one of the challenges that I've had to overcome is in and not preserving too much of the white of the page. You know, it's often, because it's the whitest part of the drawing, we lose our ability to control value relationships when we have too much of it showing. Romero, I'm seeing your questions here. I'm a little confused. If you could just kind of clarify, you're asking what were you looking at and what were you thinking about? If you could kind of point me in the direction of where I was working at the time, I don't know which point that question came in, so I may have lost it. And so one of the things that I'm doing whenever I'm working on the edges of the vase, I'm always looking back and forth between them. So rather than try to just focus on this edge here, I need to also then work on the other side. And that just becomes, it's got to become a habit for me in order to achieve that symmetry. Let me kind of soften this a little bit. How are we doing on time? Well, we're actually flying along here pretty well. All right, I feel like the overall structure is looking good. I think it could be helpful to do some negative drawing. Actually, I'll use this rubber eraser to try to resolve some of the this edge here. And now the trick here is as I'm looking at the symmetry, when I'm erasing here, I'm erasing out the vase portion itself. When I come over here, I'm actually erasing that negative space. So this is the real challenge is flipping back and forth between positive space and negative space. And I apologize if it seems like I'm glaring at you and I'm looking up. I'm studying the reference photo and not scowling. I think I've mentioned this before. One of the fun things to observe in a drawing class is when we work on self-portraits and we're working from life, getting a whole wall of angry faces because we're also focusing, we're kind of studying the portrait there, and then it all comes across as though we're angry. So okay, just evaluating the angle across the top here. There's a lot of details in this section here that I'll have to try to figure out. But I don't want to spend too much time. It's just like, I like to think about it as we're making a kind of a quick statement and we're moving on rather than getting bogged down. Just kind of make a note, move on to the next part. Now let's see. This is kind of tricky in here. I'm going to use my eraser to establish just kind of a light indication of that base. But I'm intentionally trying to break up this edge here. I'm taking it in these small bites rather than try to create that whole curve in one go. So as you can see, like I started up here, bounced around, and now coming back around to this section here. I just want to check any questions here. If you do have any questions, if you're new, I want to welcome you. But we're about 40 minutes into this drawing, and so the objective here is to try to get through this in about 2 hours. And hopefully you're drawing along. If you are new, again, you're going to want to know that the reference image is in the description below. So when I'm erasing out that light on that fabric there, and kind of lifting off here, I want to maintain that soft edge because I don't want to invent something. I can't really see very clearly when I have my vision blurred. I can't really see that edge, so I don't want to invent something yet. Then this. So when I'm working with the eraser, I'm thinking about it just as any other drawing tool. So I'm thinking about pressure and direction of marks, things like that. There's this nice light peeking through over here. This is kind of an essential part of the drawing here to balance, it's kind of balance out the composition. So just doing some drawing with the eraser here. And actually I'm gonna use the kneaded eraser. And up here, as I work towards that edge, I'm gonna do some negative drawing. So how is everybody doing? Anybody stuck anywhere? Any questions? Anybody taking a wildly different approach? Or even slightly different approach? I don't know why I said wildly. Anybody using different materials altogether? And this is just using an ebony pencil and erasers, really. All right. Alicia, like your comment, erasing makes a huge difference. Yeah, it does. I didn't anticipate that it would make as much of a difference as it did. So I'm glad it worked out on camera. Let's see. Oh, I like that interesting comment there, Maier, that it's an impressionistic stage right now. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of in my freshman year in college, I did a bunch of studies of Georges Seurat's Conte drawings, and they would be often like this. Really, they would capture this beautiful, soft sense of light, and it was a great way to confront the issue of edges, because I was really utilizing that as a way to understand how to not draw with lines. I was coming into art school and I had line work down because that's all I'd ever known before. And then when I had was shown that you can create these beautiful drawings without really utilizing any line, it blew my mind. And so, yeah, I kind of thinking about that as I'm going through. Again, I'm kind of ignoring that bow that's coming out there. All right, but I feel generally confident. It feels like it's too bulbous at the bottom. So I need to address that a little bit. So what I'm doing right now is I'm closing one eye and I'm holding this pencil vertical. I'm aligning it with this edge here. So something like that, essentially. And then what I'm doing is I'm looking at this shape here on the reference photo. to try to better understand that form. And I think I just need to come in a little bit. So still utilizing this overhand grip, really starting really lightly. I'm kind of dropping those marks down and kind of feathering out. It feels like it's a little bit too dark right now, but... And then I can come over on this side. And rather than actually really marking it more, I'm just trying to visualize where I want that to go. And I'll do some negative drawing here, subtract out that negative space back in here. That feels a little bit better. It's all very subtle. Now in this case, it's something that we talk about a lot in this show, and we talked about that at the top, is that the objective in demonstrating this process is that it puts you in control of how much detail you want. Just like as you're observing that, you know, there's kind of a nice impressionistic aspect to it now, and you may like that for your own drawing. Or if you want to move it along farther, if you want to add more detail, you can as well. But this is one of the things that's kind of blowing my mind right now, is that it looks so correct from this angle right here. And then I look up and I'm like, oh, it's off. These subtle changes can make a big impact on the overall drawing. So if you're ever drawing something like a guitar or you know, something like that that's largely symmetrical, hopefully that this would translate. So right now I'm observing that this form here is, that curve isn't quite right. So I'm just trying to create a little bit more symmetry. One of the things that gets really tricky is that if you follow along this edge here, you look at here, for example, you get this really bright light, and that merges with this intense reflection right at the edge of the picture. And then you can see that reflection actually emerges up here at the top. And so the actual edge of the vase might be somewhere over here, but we can't see it. So the last thing we see is this subtle reflection right in here that we might initially interpret as the edge of the vase when it actually isn't. So that can be kind of tricky here. So especially along this edge, I feel like that's what's happening down along in this edge along here too, is that the actual edge of the vase is offset a little bit from where we might initially perceive it. Katie, as someone who uses oil paint regularly, do you have any beginner tips with charcoal and pencil? You know, I think, let me see. I think that the thing that distinguishes it for me when I'm drawing as part of the painting process, I think the thing I lean on most are building up large masses of value and thinking in terms of mass rather than line. So just as I was talking about earlier. And so my suggestion would be to try to practice that. If you are more accustomed to creating a contour line first and then filling in the details, try to reverse that. I refer to it as kind of inside out drawing. Start from the center of the form and work your way out to the edge, or start from the center of the negative space and work into that edge. And try to find that edge through a value relationship rather than a line. And for me, that translates to oil painting a bit more readily than some other kind of drawing techniques, because when oil painting, I'm focusing so much on color relationships, value relationships, and big blocks of color rather than creating an outline that you're then filling in. And so, but that part of that just is because that's my approach to drawing. You know, it's in no way kind of unique, but you may have a different approach to painting. So. And then Heather, you found myself getting distracted by all the reflections in the vase. Some of them are striped both vertically and horizontally, and now I'm wishing I hadn't rendered those so soon. Thank you for sharing that. I know that feeling. I did that in the preparatory one. So, Wilma, welcome. Joining late. I love still lives with pictures of vases. I will continue to watch and draw the scene later. Awesome. Yeah, so anybody who's new, this does go up as a recording, so if you want to just kind of watch for now and then gather your materials and draw along later, you can do that certainly. So, all right, what do I need to do? I've kind of lost this edge here. So now I'm really focusing on the edges. It's kind of wonky at this stage. And I feel like I need to address kind of both sides of it. So making very subtle changes to the form. I'm getting happier with this side here, but this side feels like it's still too bulbous. And what I need to do is I need to stop looking at it from this perspective. So I'm looking at the projection on top. So I'm looking at what you're seeing. And this is starting to get confusing here, because that dark spot was getting so massive. So I'm going to work kind of back and forth between the eraser and the eraser and the graphite here to find that edge. How's that? Is that feeling better? Let's see, I don't like this here. So we mentioned that at the top of the episode that this is a lot about edges. And so now I'm really kind of digging into it. Kind of get back, your comment, Heather, just popped into my head about those, getting to those reflections, those details too soon. You can always, if that were me, I think what I would do is I would just do this. I would just wipe it all down, build it up again, wipe it all down. You can certainly, I think, reclaim it. So hopefully it's still working for you. All right, so I'm kind of, this area is off down in here. So I'm kind of putting a pin in that in my mind right now. I'm going to come back to it. So I think what I want to do now is I'm going to start up in this area, really refining. So I'm going to keep using this overhand grip to prioritize broader areas of value. I'm going to start to add a bit more specificity to this form. And what I like about this overhand grip is that it allows me a little bit more control over the pressure. And so I'm going to be working back and forth between utilizing this, the eraser and then the graphite. And then how we address the edges, I think, is going to make a big difference. So I'm going to try to talk through where my mind is at when I'm working with the edges. So in this case, there's that lip, there's a sharp turn up here, and that dark line is the shadow core, and it's not a sharp edge. There's a bit of kind of diffusion happening at the edge. So I'm trying to kind of start with that path and then feather it out just slightly so it's not a really sharp edge, and then use the eraser in here to create a sharper edge. Kind of carve out the light on the back side of that picture there. And then the handle, and when we're looking at the positive and negative space, the handle gets darker against that lighter edge. So this is really utilizing just the weight of the pencil to create that edge. Watermelon, how do you stop it from smudging? Thank you, Katie, for answering that. Yeah, so there you can see right along here, there's just a strip of wood on this drawing board that I can kind of lean on, and that allows me to kind of keep that hand off. But as you can see, I also, I'm not worried about protecting the paper. I smudge all the time. And I want that to happen because that allows me to then erase out the highlights later. So so that's really what I'm thinking about there. I learned long ago that it seemed futile to try to protect a drawing and keep it clean. It would make me feel claustrophobic when I would do that, so I stopped. And now I just kind of incorporate that smudging into the whole drawing practice. I know it's going to happen, so then I try to figure out, well, how can I use those smudges strategically? So I'm coming down along here, and now there's this really sharp highlight along in here. And I want to be strategic again on how I address that. I'm going to use this side of that highlight is going to be that sharp edge. But I want the left side of that highlight to be slightly softer, and that will hopefully attach it to the vase. If it's really sharp on both sides, it could pop off. And that's one of the things too that I learned about reflections, is that I would be often too sharp with them, or especially too consistently sharp, in that, you know, every reflection was kind of rendered to the same degree, and then it ultimately just became visually confusing. So I want to kind of be strategic in where I'm becoming more controlled, more kind of sharper. So as I'm following up along the handle, for example, it's really nice and crisp here, but then when you start to lose some of that form along that edge, we get those nice lost and found edges. All right, so I'm kind of just suggesting that handle a bit now. Now coming back into here. So using kind of subtle, soft, circular marks, using this overhand grip, I'm trying to build up a nice even tone here. There's already a tone, or a value, whatever you prefer to use. Actually, I think what I'll do is I'm going to use my blending stump here just to kind of smooth it out, fill in the tooth of the paper just a little bit. This is one of the advantages to using an overhand grip, is that it's a little more gentle on the surface of the paper. And so I'm not creating these embossed marks, which would then kind of fill in when I smudge like this, or it would create, those marks would be highly visible at this stage. So. All right, so what am I doing here? So I still want to make sure I'm not becoming too focused on those sharper edges. I want to make sure that I have the form of the vase properly first. So what I need to do is observe the form shadow that travels down the entire length of the picture. Because what I can see is, like, there's this division right in here. And when I focus on that, I lose sight of that overall form shadow. When I let my eyes lose focus, that edge virtually disappears. And instead, what I see is a darkening of the form right in along this whole path leading right up to the edge. And so that's what I want to capture first. Kind of unify those two portions of the vase. So as I'm building that up, is just using kind of a light touch with an overhand grip, letting it roll my fingers so that I'm not developing flat spots. And I can kind of smooth this out again if I need to. And the blending stump can be kind of a tricky thing to work with. Start with a light pressure, and just as with the pencil, I allow it to roll in my fingers as I go because it's picking up and depositing graphite. And so if you don't roll it in your fingers as you work, it develops this uneven placement of graphite, this uneven distribution. That could be a problem, because then you could be working in an area, accidentally hit a dense spot on the blending stump, and it leaves a mark where you don't want it, or it picks up too much material. So kind of gradually let it roll in your fingers, and start with a really light pressure and gradually increase it as you go. And just like any other drawing tool, you're contributing to the form. So think about the direction of the marks and what's happening there. Oh, I got to go back. I missed some comments here, so I just want to make sure I'm not missing any questions, and I need to kind of take a break. My brain is kind of all over the place. Let's see. It's how to do it on hard and soft edges. All right, Watermelon, thanks for stopping by. Katie, I'm glad it makes you feel good when we say your name here. Yes, Greg is asking about the blending stump. Would it help to create those really soft edges? Yes, and hopefully we'll kind of get into that a little bit. Siddharth, it looks like you have a question, but I'm missing the question. So if you could type that again, I'd love to be able to answer what you're looking for. I seem to have missed it in the thread here. So so Katie, an 11-year-old, awesome. Mushiar, let's see. I'm new here and getting back into it after about 8 years of neglecting it. Oh, welcome back to drawing. I know how that feels. that's what started this whole thing, is that drawing is so easy to neglect. But I'm glad this is working, and hopefully you'll join us every week. So we meet every Wednesday, so hopefully you'll join us next Wednesday as well. Thank you for those comments, Wilma. Okay, let's see. I'm not seeing any other questions. Katie says, "Hey Scott, what would you recommend for painting portraits with oil paint? In my experience, it's a bit hard with hair." Yeah, painting, well, portraits in general. Anybody, those of you who have seen this series, I've done quite a few portraits here because it's a challenge for me. Portraits in general are wicked hard. So let me think about what could be helpful. But so I work with artistnetwork.com. So I would say go there. We have a lot of courses and videos on portrait painting. Christy Gordon has a really great one and she breaks it down into really easy to understand kind of strategies for creating an effective portrait. I don't know as if I'm really the best authority there. Okay, so I want to get back to this now. Evaluating this, there's this dark shadow core along this ridge here that I want to address. Now, what I'm placing in here isn't the edge of it. You can see in the reference photo that there's a thin light highlight. So I'm leaving that in there, and I'm going to actually capture that a little bit more when I get that leafy bough drawn in there. So again, using the side of the pencil because I don't want to create a super sharp line. Just building up a kind of a darker haze along that edge. But I think I do need to sharpen it just a little bit right up in here. So the trick I've found, for me at least, is to, if I'm sharpening up an area, only sharpen a small portion of it, not the entire edge. I want to be really selective in where I bring things into focus. And then, Greg, as you were suggesting, the blending stump can be really helpful in refining some of these reflections here. what I like about with the blending stump is when it really starts to build up material, and you can start to really draw with it. So as you're suggesting here, on this reflection, as I talked about earlier, I want it to be a little bit softer on the side of the reflection that is wrapping around the form, a little bit harder against the contour. So I'll use my pencil to create that sharp edge here, and I'll use my blending stump along in here, and that's naturally going to create a transition between those. All right. And so now as I come down through here, as I talked about that negative space there that's all really light, it merges with a reflection on the edge of the picture here. And so what I need to do is be really sensitive. I actually want to be subtle with the edge here. I want this to be a softer edge. So I'm going to use the blending stump to draw this portion of the vase in. And then as we come down here, what we notice is that there's a reflection that initiates inside the contour of the vase over here, and then it kind of wraps around the edge of the vase right around here. Again, it's all very subtle. And in that way, you can see how that edge, there's a lot of variation along there. Okay, I'm gonna sharpen that up. And we get down here to the handle. Maybe what I'll do is I'll draw that handle in. It's a kind of a sharper negative drawing in here. Where's the blending stump? There's a really subtle edge like right along in here. And that's a bit too heavy-handed there. That's all right. We'll soften that up. All right. Let's see. I'm seeing a bunch of comments here. I don't know if there's any major questions here. Let's see. But I see a bunch of comments, it looks like, about kind of purchasing materials. Yeah, I like to, either from Blick or Jerry's, we'll order materials. This is a Prismacolor Ebony Pencil. I know Jerry's has a, I don't know if you're on here, Jerry's, you're often viewing, but you make a Soho brand that's really nice as well. I need to pick up more of those. I really enjoyed Derwent materials, so the Derwent Onyx is a really wonderful pencil to use. So as I'm looking along, this inner edge of the handle is really tricky. Now the thing about the handle that gets really tricky is that it's kind of a ribbon that kind of has a flatness to it. So it's rounded edges, but more of a flat top as it wraps around. And then it looks like it kind of rounds out a little bit at the base here. So I'm trying to observe whatever visual cues there are in the reference that I can use to help really understand that form. So in this case, I think the key thing is really this dark strip along the edge and capturing that path. And then if you're really stuck, pay attention to both the positive and the negative space. So this shape inside the handle, the shape outside of it, as well as the shape of the handle itself. So you want to combine all of those together to create an understanding of that form. And then of course the edges as well. See where it's sharper where it's more diffuse. So for example, right in here, there's a bit of a gradation from the outer edge towards the inner edge. And then I just use the blending stump to kind of smooth that out. I can increase the value along that edge to bring that forward a bit more. So right now I'm using what I call a modified overhand bit grip, and so I have it wedged between my fingers here, and that allows me to use the side of the pencil, but I can stabilize it with my fingertips just like with a normal tripod kind of writing grip. So it kind of gives me the best of both worlds. So if I need a sharper edge, I just roll my hand up, and that gives the point, it engages the point a bit. If I need to use the side, I can just roll it back this way. And I'm trying to lock my wrist as much as possible and then draw from the shoulder. It creates a more consistent mark for me. And then when when the curve of the wrist will actually serve the form, when it'll help me to create the curve, I can then kind of relax the wrist a bit and then draw from the wrist a bit more. But generally I try to draw from the shoulder and the elbow more. All right, but I'm happier with that. And you just kind of wipe it down, soften it a little bit. And now that these values are merging, I feel like I can come back and brighten this back up just a touch. That's a bit more accurate. I had to drop it down for these early stages to make things a little bit more visible. Ramirez asked, "Did I create some of these grips?" You know, I don't know. I don't believe that any of these are really kind of unique to me. The overhand grip is a pretty common one. Of course, the tripod grip that we're often taught to write this way. You know, most people are familiar with. I know many artists that prefer to work in an overhand grip like I do, and I think then it was just a pretty simple switch from an overhand grip to then just sliding it into my fingers here for a little bit more support. And then what I like about it too is that it allows me to control the pressure a little bit more easily. When holding it this way, the pressure is created by just kind of leaning up or into it, and it's a little bit harder to control that. On the side like this, I can just let it float over the page, and then I can gradually kind of lean in on it to create more pressure. And it's easier to kind of utilize the weight of the pencil when necessary. Okay, let's see. This is bugging me here. That little smudge. But it's going to get messy. I'm going to have to clean that up a little bit later too anyway. So, all right, where am I now? I'm going to move across the vase, kind of keeping in line with what I was talking about earlier about kind of working both sides at the same time. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I want to work that background, and I'm going right over that edge. I'm not worried about protecting it, because then I'm going to come back in with the eraser and then sharpen that back up. And that gives me the edge I'm looking for. Because what can happen is if I try to preserve that edge and I get really tight up along that edge, it kind of makes a clumsy edge for me. And so, and it creates, the term I use is a halo around there that I dislike in my work. So I just got comfortable overlapping the marks, taking that background, going right over that edge, and then using the eraser to cut back into it. So just using a kneaded eraser to soften that a little bit. And then I want to bring this reflection up like that. Now, one of the things I like about this chisel tip is it allows me to think about the marks somewhat like a brush. To get back to, I believe that was that your question, Katie, about you know, drawing to help with painting. I find it helpful to use an eraser that has kind of like a chisel tip like this. So I used a razor blade to cut this, and so then I can use the broad side of it, and I can use a sharp edge. I can use the point, and in that way, it's similar to a brush. Gives me that variety of mark. So what I'm doing now is as I'm following along this edge, I'm trying to observe where there might be a sharper, darker line. So what happens is we have this light edge here, but then there's a bit of a reflection that follows along this edge, and then right in here it becomes a little bit more visible, and it kind of disappears up there. So trying to bring a little bit of life into that, and then right underneath this it gets bright again. It catches the light. So I need to kind of work back and forth between working the background and then working the edge of the vase. And let that edge get lost. Can sharpen it back up. I don't like that curve, so I'm going to work that negative space back there to cut into it a little bit more. So hopefully that makes sense. What's happening here? Well, this is really tricky along this edge here. So again, I don't want to invent something that's not there. So I'm only going to draw the marks that I see visible. And then what I kind of observe happening is right in here, that ground becomes light against a slightly darker vase. So I'm going to erase out some of that. So just using the weight of the eraser, I'm kind of pushing away. And then ultimately what defines this edge along in here is that thin crease along the edge right along in here. And that's what kind of snaps everything into focus. So this is still a bit clumsy right in here. I don't know, it's not a very specific word when I say clumsy, but it feels heavy, overdrawn, too clear. So I'm kind of lifting up with the eraser a little bit, softening that edge. And then just bring a little bit of that edge into focus there. Okay. So if I'm happy with that form, let's see. Oh, I see some questions coming in. Let's see. All right, Katie, thanks for joining us. And then let's see. Lynn is asking, where did I get my Derwent eraser? I don't know. Derwent actually shipped me this out, so I don't know which stores have it. My first thought would be I'd run up to the Jerry's up in Fort Collins, see if they've got it there. Let's see, or try to find it online somewhere. So I'm looking at the light there, and there's a very subtle shift in value as the edge of the table gets visible in the reflection here. So I'm kind of finding that edge and then pulling up and away. And then I'll actually, there's the reflection of the leafy thing in there will, I'm going to draw that in a little bit, but I'm going to use my eraser to provide some subtle indication of where I want those reflections to be in here. There's a little reflection here. And I'm doing that because then I can come back in with my pencil and sharpen up some of these forms. So I'm just trying to get a sense for that, the forms there and the reflection. And I think what I want to do now is you can observe, you know, along this edge here, there's a light band of reflection here that kind of wraps around the form. You see it gets dark right in here. I'm going to do some negative drawing here. There, it looks like there's a picture frame that's just kind of catching in that reflection. So I'm going to do my best to not use a line to draw that. So that means I have to kind of visualize the path for it, but rather than draw a line and then fill it in, I'm trying to create marks that kind of stop short of that path, if that makes sense. So when I'm going like this, I'm trying to visualize the path of that picture frame rather than draw it in. And then as it becomes clear for me where it needs to go, like I said, I'll kind of try to stop short of that edge. And it's the same with this. It looks like the edge of the table is visible here in the reflection here. Because what happens if I draw the reflection as an outline first and then fill it in? If that line becomes strong, it's an indication to the mind that that line indicates a second object. And then the mind is, you're kind of fighting your own mind in a way, because it wants to say that whatever you're drawing in here is a different type of object, but you know it isn't. And so I don't want to use lines as much as possible. So there's a very thin, dark stripe. If you can, try to create that by scoring the path down, but moving your pencil in a slightly different direction, if that makes sense. And so then it'll be more visible as a thin mark rather than a line, if that makes sense. So like a contour line is, it's a symbol for the edge of an object, right? And so if the viewer perceives it as a contour line, we're kind of sunk a little bit, because then you're going to fight that urge to view it as a separate object. Okay, so I'm going to work the bottom. I'm going to go back to the top a little bit. Try to observe the shapes. So I'm just doing these small circular marks building up to that edge, and holding in my mind the path that the shapes need to follow. Utilizing the side of the pencil. And kind of moving in and out up to that edge here. There's that picture frame is coming into focus here. Kind of moving in and out up to that edge to create that smooth transition. All right, I just wanted to see if there's any trying to see if there's any questions here. There's a bunch of comments that I'm kind of missing, but okay, so I'm going to work back up on here. Again, working kind of back and forth because I don't want to get fixated on one spot too much, because that's when mistakes happen. As it's kind of ironic, like that, what our skills of observations are essential for drawing, but in some way, the more we focus on something without moving, the more our perception of that, whatever we're studying, gets distorted. We're kind of meant for our observations to be constantly in flux. We're always moving around and observing things, and trying to take everything in all at once, and then creating a picture of our surroundings by mentally combining all of those smaller observations, those smaller, quick observations. And so I have to sometimes remind myself to keep moving around. Don't stop too long. It's kind of like standing still for too long. It's like we're meant to always be moving. So it gets really hard to stand perfectly still for too long. And I think the same is true for our observations. So there's some inaccuracy happening down in here with this reflection. It's not quite placed properly, but I think it'll have to suffice. I don't know as if I want to get in there and correct it. I feel like it reads sufficiently as a reflection, so just kind of cleaning things up a little bit and redefining that edge, mostly because I want to get those value relationships correct, knowing that I'm going to be erasing back down to essentially the white of the paper up here. I want to now see how this reflection in here reads. One of the things that I observe is a really thin reflection right in here. I didn't place that quite properly, but I can fill that back in. And that's a little bit overstated. All right. So, and then again, this process here is designed to kind of put you in control of how much detail you want in there. This is bothering me a little bit. I need to smooth this out. So if you have bumps in if you're really trying to create a smooth transition, if I look down in here, for example, I see some marks that I don't really like. I'll target the space between the darker marks and kind of fill them in with these circular marks. Just kind of fill them in a little bit, then use a paper towel to kind of smudge out, and that creates a smoother gradation. Let me see, I think this whole thing needs to be darker, I think. And so as I'm making this kind of broad area, I'm kind of thinking about what I was just saying. I was looking at the marks, kind of leaning in a little bit more when I need a bit more pressure on an edge. Let's see. Some negative drawing in here. How are we doing on time? We're about an hour and a half. All right, so we're moving along faster than I had anticipated. Pavel is asking, it looks amazing. Please, which type of pencil, hardness, and paper would you advise for beginners? If you're a beginner, honestly, I really like these ebony pencils, very soft, or just a regular yellow No. 2 pencil. I think are very versatile tools, and I found that it works better for me to not think about managing specific drawing tools. Instead, just focus on mark making and building hand-eye coordination, things like that, to get started. And one of the things that I had observed in some beginning students is that there would be such an emphasis placed on getting the correct drawing pencil that it would sometimes inhibit them from actually drawing. Say, well, I don't have my set, so I can't draw. No, if you can find I don't know if I have one here, but just yeah, here we go. one of these guys, Dixon Ticonderoga, yellow #2 pencil. These things are awesome. It's an HB, so a nice middle of the road value. Generally, you can find them just about anywhere, and I love drawing with those. And it allows you to kind of, if you're not able to switch between pencils, you just focus on pressure control and things like that to modulate your values, and you can focus on all these other really essential drawing issues kind of more easily. So that would be my suggestion if you're just starting out. And I like the ebony pencils because it gives me that full range of values. I can make light marks, I can really make soft dark marks. And now it doesn't quite get as precise as a harder graphite, but I think that challenge to kind of achieve precision with an ebony pencil, with a really soft pencil, you learn so much about value control and pressure control that way. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is like you intentionally challenging yourself is really essential for growth as an artist. And so I'm taking a break from the vase a little bit, and I'm going to work on some of this background area. I really like this shadow under here, under this fold in the curtain. So kind of softening it, dragging down along that edge. And then rather than erasing out that edge, what I want to do is kind of darken it. And then if it's still too, and now in the context of a darker value, if it still feels like it's too dark, I can go back in and lighten it. And I'm just going to kind of suggest this window that's peeking out there. So one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is really controlling where the level of finish is in the drawing to drive people towards a focal point. For a long time when I would paint or draw, everything would be rendered to the same degree in the image. So now I'm trying to modulate that a little bit more and create more variety. So have some areas that are largely unfinished while others are really sharply focused. And in that way, what I'm observing is try to figure out like how much is too much, how much is too little. And if I'm working on this area over here, for example, I want this to be the focal point. I want this to be the star. So that's going to have a higher degree of finish. If this is too unfinished, if I haven't finished it enough, then it becomes a distraction. If I've given too much detail, then it can be an indication to the viewer that that's really an essential part. And so I need to find that balance, and the balance for me might be different than the balance for you, which is one of the cool things about art, is that we each make different decisions. All right, so I think that kind of works sufficiently over there. All right, now that gave me a bit of a time to clear my head a little bit. So I'm going to go back to working on the vase. And now what I'm observing is I don't like what's happening here. It really feels blotchy to me. So what am I going to do? I'm going to try to sharpen up this edge. There we go. And then I want to carry this down, and I feel like I need to first define the bottom edge of that vase. And as I observed earlier, there's a lot of diffusion of that dark value right in here. So I'm going to start with a larger shape first, and then find the sharper core that defines the base of the vase within that. So now I'm really trying to focus on the quality of that curve. How curved is it? So I just switched to the tripod grip there to make that curve. And it's amazing how much that brings that whole shape of the vase together. You know, that edge was largely lost before, but what it does is if you give just enough indication of where those edges are, your brain fills in the rest. You know, it's the same mechanism in our minds that connects stars together to create constellations, right? We're kind of designed to see patterns by connecting dots together, and so I'm trying to leverage that in the drawing to create these lost and found edges. I think this is what's bothering me, is I kind of lost sight of that shadow core path that we had talked about earlier. And so as you're starting to bring this together, you know, again, one of the things that kind of distinguishes you as the artist from me on your, you know, as you're working on your drawing, you're going to define for yourself what your threshold is with regards to detail. You know, do you need more detail? Do you need less? Is it good the way it is now, or do you really need to define more? And I'm just going to keep pushing this because we're only an hour and a half in. I thought we would be. I thought I'd have a. I thought this would be taking a bit longer than it actually is, but. So this is largely using just the weight of the pencil. Kind of washing over this whole area. That helps to unify things. So if it feels like the reflections are just kind of jumping off of the surface, then what you might try doing is putting a wash over the entire stage to help kind of unify things, or wipe it down with a paper towel, again, to unify it. All right, how do we feel about this? I think I need a little bit more, a little more definition of that reflection right in here, kind of sneaking up on that edge a little bit. So really light touch. And where I need a sharper edge, I can kind of just angle the pencil up a little bit more. Again, I'm trying to not make a line, so as I'm dropping in those marks, I'm kind of feathering them out way into the darker stage to create that sharper edge. Sri, I'll give you a shout out. Sorry if I missed that earlier. All right, Nellie, thank you for the comments, and Wilma, everybody. I appreciate all of these comments. I do my best as an instructor, but you know, just please feel free to shout out if I'm not explaining things, you know, clearly. I want to make sure that it's landing. It's hard when I don't have people in front of me that I can respond to, and I for this series, I really want this to be kind of a collaborative work experience. We're all drawing together, and so I'm just kind of sharing how I approach things, and I find it really fascinating when you know, I encounter people who approach things very differently. Of course, it's very satisfying and validating when people say, "Hey, that's exactly how I teach," or whatever. But I also like to be challenged. So just using the blending stump to refine things a little bit. As I mentioned before in previous episodes, I kind of came to to understanding the power of a blending stump late in my career as an artist, I always kind of rejected them because I felt like, I don't know, any sort of kind of blending control I should be able to manage using just the graphite. I don't think I really appreciated the opportunities with a blending stump in that you can really achieve marks that that are unique. It's not just about smoothing things out, it's about, excuse me, contributing to that form. I think I do want to highlight this edge along in here, so I'm going to kind of tap along there, bring a little bit more definition to that subtle reflection in there. But yeah, I really dig working with blending stumps now. So I'm actually going to use that to create, right in here there's a reflection of those leaves in the in there, and I find that this is really where the blending stump can be great. So I'm just using the side of it, trying to visualize the path that these are going to follow along. And I feel like that is so much more accurate and effective as reading as a reflection in that glass than if I were to use kind of a fine tip of a graphite pencil. And I think in part because it allows me to create very specific shapes rather than lines more. If that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. Because I think that, that when I think about this subject, when you first look at the subject, you think about it as not a vase, as a pitcher, and then you start to get absorbed in the reflections and all those fine details. And so I want a viewer to look at this to the same degree. If I prioritize those reflections too much, then that becomes the first thing the viewer sees, and it inverts the natural process that observe when I think about how I actually confront the subject. So, all right. So what happens now is that this feels a bit too strong. So before I adjust that, I want to figure out first that the lightest part is right in here. So that's where the strongest highlight is. So I want to make that really working as effectively as possible. Let me pull that out. Now that's still a little bit too strong, so I'm just going to use the side of my finger here and start to smudge that out a little bit. That knocks it down just a touch, and then I think I need to kind of fill this in. So just smudging there so it doesn't read as a line there. That's a bit better. All right. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I don't know, I think I do need a little bit of an indication of this, what's happening here on the tabletop. And so I want to be thinking about this plane receding back here, and there's some subtle lines that help to indicate that. I'm just using the side of the pencil. I don't want to add a lot of detail, so I'm just going to kind of suggest the texture. And if I kind of get a sense for these lines of perspective that might follow along the surface. And so they become more vertical off to the right, gradually angling to this edge here as we move across. So I'm trying to think about the direction of my marks and try to keep consistent with perspective. So if anything, just you can have them kind of radiate out a little bit. And if I use the side of the pencil like this, I can use the tooth of the paper to suggest the texture of that surface. I don't want to get too detailed though, because I want to kind of move things along. But sometimes it can just be helpful to kind of visualize how that perspective might work, almost like as though there were a grid being placed on that surface, and what direction would those marks follow. Okay, I think I need to, I do want to sharpen up this up here a little bit. So as I'm working on that back side of that opening, I'm trying to also be aware of this front side, try to keep that perspective consistent from front to back. In my initial study, I had drawn this angle to great, and you can kind of see that in the thumbnail for this image. Just a slight change in that angle across that back can twist and distort things just a little bit. And so for me, that was important, and it may not be something that you find all that critical. All right, so now let's get to this, to the greens. How are we doing? Everybody doing all right? Let's see, Dbald8, do you have to be an Artist Network member to view or upload images? I have an account, but I guess that's not enough. You don't have to be a paid member, but you should have I do believe you have to have an account. So just a username and password in order to leave a message. So, and I do try to respond to as many people as I can in that. So I love seeing seeing everybody's work. So if you are new, what we're talking about is that on Artist Network, there's a drawing together section, and each episode has its own page where you can find a chat and you see all the drawings that everybody's posted. It's pretty awesome. And it's been really awesome to see the growth there from a lot of you. And what's most encouraging is when I see people, you've posted something and say, yeah, I'm not really happy with this, or I really struggled. I'm like, that's where we learn so much. It can be really intimidating. So I give you all a lot of credit for those of you who have done that. All right, so now let's see. I want to get, we're going to get the look of that leaf coming out of there. This is actually, what do I want to do? I'm looking for a strip of paper. Yeah, will this do it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to protect this edge right along in here. So if I bring that right up like that, now what I can do is I can kind of more easily kind of render some of these kind of spiky evergreen leaves there. And you can see how it creates that nice sharp edge without having to score a line there. If I had drawn a heavy line, that's going to flatten things out. It's going to work against that sense of light and atmosphere that I'm going for. Now, I'm not really doing a great job kind of mimicking the reference. Like some of these aren't exactly right, but that's all right. I mostly want to kind of create an impression of this. So if I'm off by a slight amount, that's okay. So I'm going to use the side of the pencil to create these because I feel like it creates more natural looking marks. So I'm just using the strip of paper to protect that edge while I draw the greens that kind of emerge out of that. And then once I'm clear of that, once I've got that whole area drawn, I'm in good shape. I'm free to roam about the cabin here. And I'm thinking more about gesture and direction than anything. If I were to ask this now, I can then drop in some of these little guys that are poking out. Now, again, to kind of get back to that concept of gesture and direction, what I mean by that is I want to get the quality of these leaves more than really 100% photographic reproduction of this. And so I want to be thinking about like what are the shapes? How big are the marks? What angle? Are they kind of slightly rounded? Are they sharp? And then how do they change as we move from left to right? So as we move across here, for example, we're kind of shearing across the plane of that a bit more, so those marks become thinner and kind of sharper. And I'm going to start with a fairly light touch, and then work my way into some of the darker marks in a little bit. So I'll show you that. I want to try to, I'm just indicating those paths. I want to think about relative to the vase, where's the end of that path for this? And I think it's somewhere right around here. And so if you look at this pencil, I don't know if we can, how well we can see it, but it's not super sharp. I used a razor blade to carve this, but I've been using the side of the pencil the whole time. So there's an irregularity in there that I'm actually trying to leverage for this drawing. And because I feel like allowing some of those marks just to kind of naturally form will lead to marks that feel more natural as well. So it's not about really trying to fight for control to get each and every little kind of sprig on this indicated accurately. I'm trying to suggest it, create an impression of this. So there is a bit of kind of intuition that's kind of playing in, and really more gestural thinking than anything. So I'm reacting to how it flows, how it moves, relative to the vase more than anything. And then before I place a mark, I'm doing a kind of a quick check-in. Think about where I am relative to everything else. And so this is the kind of the first pass with a fairly light value. And now I can go back through and observe the light and shadow structure a little bit more. So as I look under here, for example, there's kind of a distinct shadow along in here that helps to create that that rounded quality. There's some of these, and there's that kind of fall behind on the back side that are all in shadow, so we're looking underneath them. So I can apply a little bit more pressure, but I'm still thinking kind of gesturally about it. So rather than drawing an outline and filling it in, I'm trying to strike that mark on the first go. And then here, like in this section here, it kind of falls into shadow a little bit. And then I'm also trying to think about creating an irregular form. These aren't regularly spaced, even marks, and it's really easy to do that. There's a natural instinct to make kind of repetitive marks like that. And so I'm really trying to observe the rhythm of this and the changing spacing and size of these marks. So hopefully that makes sense. And that way it starts to feel like it's coming together. I think I need a little bit more precision down in here. I feel like if I get the end right, we'll kind of fill in the rest of that information. So I want to get the kind of the tip of this dropped in. And so as I'm making these, I'm trying to visualize a path, and then rather than run them this way, I'm making my marks run perpendicular to the path that they're taking, and that's going to hopefully again create more natural looking forms. So, all right. How's everybody feeling? Whew. Pavel, you're from the Czech Republic, which produces the Koh-i-Noor. Oh, I've heard really good things about that, so I should check that out. So Donna is asking if the supply said smooth drawing paper, but you have tooth. What are you using? So this is not like a Bristol board or vellum, which might be really smooth. What am I using? I'm using, I like this Hahnemühle paper. This is the Schizo 190. it's not easy to find. They ship me out some and I love it, but I can't find it anywhere. So I feel really bad for those of you, you've said that, I want to give it a shot, but I can't find it anywhere. But really, Strathmore, Canson, they all make really good smooth drawing papers. But I do like to have some tooth. So you can kind of see the tooth of it here. If I do kind of just a rubbing here, you can kind of see that it's not perfectly smooth. So it's not slick or almost kind of plasticky. And so when you go to the art supply store, as you're looking, feel out the paper and see what works best for you. And I always recommend, trying as many different, kinds as possible. Try different combinations. Try it with charcoal. Try it with graphite. So because a paper might work really well for graphite, but not at all for charcoal, and it might work, well for, charcoal, but not, vice versa. So give it a shot. Try things out. Just going to add a little bit of kind of variety here. So I think we're pretty much done. I don't know how much more I can really do that's going to give you any more information to kind of work with. So I'll hang on for a little bit and kind of keep tweaking this, but join me next Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to be working on a landscape with a stroke of lightning, and it's a bit of a challenge. So I'm working on it now. We're going to have that posted soon. But I hope everybody gets a chance to share their work. So check out artistnetwork.com. Go to that link that I provided at the top of the chat or in the discussion thread, and you can share your work there. Go back and you can draw any of the old sessions as well. There's no need to kind of go in any specific order. I think I do want to refine this part a little bit more, but again, I want to thank you all for joining me here. It's awesome. This is a fantastic day, and it's so good to see everybody. A lot of new faces today. Have fun with this. Any other lingering questions? Like I said, I'll hang on to try to address. I'm kind of pumping up the light on this a little bit. The reference image doesn't quite have this much going on, but so I'm kind of inventing a little bit here. So just using the kneaded eraser with just a light pressure, trying to feather things out a little bit. There you have it. Let me get back here, see if there's any other questions. I'm sorry if I missed one. There were a lot of comments today, which is awesome, but it does mean that I sometimes miss things. So if there was something that I missed that you really want me to answer, feel free to type that out quickly here. It's about a 30-second delay, but I will do my best to catch it. Mariana Wood, I like that comment. Sometimes drawing reminds me of math. Like you say, it's something one solves. Yes, that is an interesting thing. Math does not agree with me. I do my best, but there is kind of a similar mentality. I think, like you're saying, for me, the subject, the materials, whatever's happening on the page, they all inform one another, and it's all about using drawing to better understand your surroundings, using your skills of observations to better improve your drawing, and they feed one another. And that's what I love most about drawing, is that it allows us to observe a bit of what is happening in the creator's mind, right? So when we look at a drawing, we see all the thoughts that kind of led through that drawing, and that's what's really cool. And so I like to let that show. When a drawing gets too kind of clean and we lose that, I kind of feel like I'm missing something about that person. I really enjoy sketches and loose things that aren't necessarily perfect and clean. I like to see the struggle happen on the page sometimes, because that's evidence of the person who created that drawing. So I'm really glad you made that comment, Mariana. So Deanne, thank you for those comments. Thank you so much, everybody. Looks like all the questions have come in. Oh, Thomas, why not start with a rectangle and fill the shape with a picture to keep the symmetry? You know, I think that's a good question. So what Thomas is talking about is kind of defining the parameters by establishing the proportions of kind of a base rectangle and then working in there. And I think that's a perfectly valid process, and I think it works for a lot of people. I found that in my process, and maybe this is something I need to work on, what ends up happening is that rectangle becomes too much of a kind of confining restraint for me. So I'll draw that rectangle, fit everything to suit that, but if that initial rectangle is off, then everything else is off. And I have a hard time seeing that. Whereas if I'm using angle sighting, starting with a gesture and then correcting using angle sighting, comparative measuring, things like that, and coming at it from a bunch of different directions, it does take me a little bit longer, but I feel like I understand it a bit more deeply than the other way around, if that makes sense. So, but again, that's just kind of how I work, and it comes out of just kind of past experience about where I struggle. It's kind of like when drawing a portrait, you know, there's some artists that will start by drawing an oval and then continue to refine that. That initial oval for me, it gets difficult to question that and then make adjustments later. And so I need to just abandon that altogether and come at it a different way. So hopefully that makes sense. And it may not be the most efficient, but that's what happens. Penny, first time being able to draw along. I can't wait to see what you've done. So I'm glad to hear that you were able to do that. Let's see. Great being back here today, Heather. It was great, awesome. I'm sorry that it was frustrating you, but I also am I'm happy to hear that you share it, because that's the nature of drawing, is that you've got to do a lot of frustrating drawings in order to find the one or two that really are going to work. So, and we often don't kind of talk about that as artists. Most artists don't like to necessarily share all the mistakes and the missteps along the way, but that's an essential part of it. We got to make a lot of messes and then kind of clean them up. So, let's see. All right. I see another question again about being an Artist Network member. Again, you just have to be, if you want to share your work, you just have to be signed in, as opposed to like a paid member where you get access to all the videos and magazines and things like that. So if you are a member, of course, you can share everything, but yeah, I think you do have to sign in if you want to share your work. So. Mahmoud is asking how to improve your pencil drawing skill. Well, you can check out all the past series. We've got 80 plus episodes on this, so if you're looking to get going, I think the best way to do it is to draw as much as possible. Now, if time is limited, I always recommend that you try to prioritize gesture drawing and quick sketches over fully rendered drawings, because in a drawing process, so much hinges on that initial gesture and kind of solving those initial problems of proportion, placement of the object, things like that. When you get to the fine detail, all of those big decisions are kind of done, and it's really just a matter of executing on those details. And so you address some of the bigger and more critical elements when you're doing a gesture and a quick sketch than a fully rendered drawing. So that's if your time is limited. If you've got infinite time, then I'd say whatever, you could draw as many quick gestures as you can. Spend time really refining and creating finished drawings, because I do think there is value in that too. But that would be just kind of my suggestion, and just get comfortable working with materials. And so the more intimately you understand the material, the better. And so just draw a lot, and then find teachers that you really connect with. Find if it's a book, if it's a video, if it's a workshop, find the way that you learn the best, and then kind of dig into that and test it out. And so a class may work for you now, but then in a year from now, you may find that really what you need is a video or a book or something like that. So, all right, thank you everybody. It looks like all the questions have been submitted. I really want to thank you all. I wasn't able to call out to everybody, but I want to thank you all for all the kind words. This has been another fantastic class. I love it. This is my favorite time of the week. So join me next week, next Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll work on a fun lightning strike, kind of get into the landscape here. So I try to vary it up each week, something different. And have a great weekend, everybody. See you all next week.